The last of the evening's patrons had long since gone, their laughter and excited chatter fading away into the cool night air, leaving behind a profound silence that settled over the Royal Crest Auditorium like a soft, heavy blanket. This was Clara's time. She moved through the grand, empty foyer, her worn sneakers squeaking softly on the freshly mopped marble, a sound that was swallowed by the sheer size of the room. Her cleaning cart, a faithful companion of dented metal and worn-out wheels, glided behind her like a quiet shadow. To the world, Clara was invisible. She was the woman who pushed the broom, who wiped away the smudges, and collected the forgotten programs. A background character in the glamorous drama that unfolded here every night. She was in her late 50s, though the years had etched themselves onto her face not with harsh lines, but with a kind of gentle softening, like a photograph left in the sun for too long. Her hair, a once vibrant brown, was now a soft sultan pepper, pulled back into a neat, practical bun that never seemed to come loose. Her hands told a different story. They were strong and capable, the knuckles a little swollen, the nails clipped short, but they were also the hands of someone who once knew a different kind of work, a different kind of touch. A faint, almost invisible scar ran across the back of her left thumb, a tiny, permanent reminder of a life she used to live as she worked. Polishing the ornate brass railings until they gleamed like gold, her mind often wandered. She'd hear the ghost of a symphony in the whisper of the air conditioning, or the faint echo of a soprano's high note in the creak of an old wooden floorboard. This building was alive with music even when it was empty. It was in the walls, the velvet seats, the very dust motes that danced in the slivers of moonlight piercing the high-arched windows. For Clara, cleaning wasn't a chore. It was a form of tending, of caring for a sacred space. She knew every squeaky floorboard, every water spot on the ceiling, every secret scuff mark on the stage wings. She was the auditorium's silent guardian. The young musicians who practiced here saw her as part of the furniture. They would leave their sheet music in coffee cups, assuming correctly that Clara would quietly clean up after them. They were so full of their own noise, their own ambition, that they barely registered her quiet presence. The most dismissive of them all was Julian, the young pianist who was the current toast of the city. He was a prodigy, with fingers that flew across the keys like startled birds, and a reputation for being as brilliant as he was arrogant. He treated the auditorium and everyone in it as his personal kingdom. He'd walk past Clara without a glance, sometimes tossing his coat or an empty water bottle in her general direction with a mumbled, "Here you go," as if she were a human trash can. Clara never reacted. She would simply pick up the item, her expression unreadable, and add it to her cart. She had learned a long time ago that showing hurt was a waste of energy. Inside, however, a small, cold knot would form. It wasn't anger. Not really. It was a deep, quiet sadness for a world that measured a person's worth by their spotlight, by the loudness of their voice or the flashiness of their talent. She would watch him sometimes from the shadows of the upper balcony as he practiced. His playing was technically flawless, a torrent of perfect, precise notes. But to Clara, it felt empty. It was like looking at a beautiful, intricately built machine. It was impressive, but it had no soul. It didn't breathe. Her nightly routine always led her to the same place, the center of the vast, empty stage. There it sat, the grand piano, a gleaming black Steinway, over 100 years old, its polished surface reflecting the single work light she had set up. It was the heart of the auditorium, and for Clara, it was the heart of her secret life. This was the moment she waited for all day. She would put away her harsh cleaning chemicals and rough cloths. From a small pouch in her cart, she would pull out a soft, chamois cloth, worn thin with years of gentle use. She approached the piano not like a janitor, but like a pilgrim approaching a shrine. Her steps slowed. Her breathing softened. She would carefully wipe down the smooth, cool lid, her movements full of a reverence that no one else ever saw. She'd clean the ivory keys, one by one, her touch barely there, as if she were afraid of waking a sleeping giant. This was her piano, in a way no one else's could ever be. She knew its quirks, the slight buzz in the A flat above middle C, the way the sustain pedal stuck just a little on humid days. She knew its voice. Tonight the silence felt heavier than usual. Julian had had a particularly difficult rehearsal, storming out after a particularly harsh exchange with the conductor about the tempo of a passage. The air still crackled with his frustrated energy. Clara finished her polishing, her cart parked in the wings. The rest of the building was dark and still. She was alone, completely and utterly alone with the piano. She looked out at the thousands of empty red velvet seats, stretching up into the darkness like a silent waiting army. For a moment, she hesitated. A familiar wave of doubt washed over her. Who was she to even think about it? She was just the cleaning lady. Her hands were made for scrubbing floors, not for coaxing magic from 88 keys. But then, the memory of Julian's cold, mechanical playing and his casual disregard sparked something inside her. A tiny, defiant flicker. She pulled up the adjustable bench, the one she had meticulously tightened just last week. She sat down, her back straightening automatically. Her fingers, which had been curled around the handle of a mop just an hour ago, now hovered over the keys. They felt stiff, foreign. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and let it out slowly. She didn't think about the empty seats or the ghost of Julian's arrogance. She just thought about the music. Her right thumb found the C below middle C, it pressed down. A single, clear note rang out, pure and full, filling the enormous space with a sound that seemed to have a life of its own. It was a question, an invitation, and then her fingers began to move. They were slow at first, feeling their way back home, like a traveler walking a familiar path after a long journey away. But then a memory took over, a muscle memory deeper than time. The music that flowed from the piano was not the complex, modern piece Julian was struggling with. It was something else entirely. It was an old melody, a simple folk song her grandmother used to hum, but Clara had transformed it. She wove around the simple tune with complex, sorrowful harmonies, turning it into a lament. It was the sound of rain on a window pane, of a goodbye unspoken, of a dream folded away and placed in a dusty drawer. Each note was heavy with the weight of years, with the quiet dignity of a life lived in the shadows. She played with a feeling that Julian, with all his technical genius, could never hope to understand. She played with heartbreak. She played with love. She played with the quiet, stubborn hope that even the most faded things still have beauty. The music filled the hall, not with noise, but with a story. Her story, and in the silent, empty auditorium, under the gaze of 1,000 empty seats, Clara, the invisible woman, was finally, completely, and breathtakingly seen. The night of the Symphony for a New Generation fundraiser arrived with a different kind of energy. The quiet, sacred silence that Clara cherished was gone, replaced by a low, excited hum that vibrated through the very floor she had polished just hours before. The auditorium was transformed. The air, usually filled with the scent of old wood and cleaning wax, was now a thick cocktail of expensive perfume, hairspray, and anticipation. The thousands of red velvet seats were no longer a silent army. They were filled with the city's wealthiest patrons, dressed in shimmering gowns and stiff tuxedos, their jewelry catching the light like tiny captured stars. They were here to see and be seen, but more importantly, they were here to witness Julian. From her usual post in the shadows of the side entrance, Clara watched the scene unfold. She had finished her main cleaning duties hours ago, but on big nights like this, she was kept on standby. A ghost in a gray uniform, ready to handle any spills or emergencies. She saw the way people's eyes lit up when Julian's name was mentioned. He was no longer just a musician. He was an event. He moved through the crowd like a shark, a sleek smile permanently fixed on his face, accepting compliments with a practiced nod. He was in his element, a king surveying his court. He didn't notice Clara, of course. To him, she was just another part of the ornate wallpaper. Backstage, however, the atmosphere was electric, with a different kind of charge. It was the tense, nervous energy that always precedes a performance. Stagehands scurried about with final props. The conductor reviewed his notes with a furrowed brow, and Mr. Abernathy, the hall's manager, was practically vibrating with anxiety. This fundraiser was his baby, and its success or failure rested squarely on his shoulders. He had investors to impress, and a board of directors to answer to. Julian, meanwhile, was a picture of cool confidence, though his confidence had a sharp, arrogant edge. He dismissed the conductor's suggestion to run through a difficult passage one last time. "I don't need to," he'd said with a dismissive wave of his hand. "I was born to play this piece. The piano and I are one." Clara, quietly wiping down a spot on the wall near the stage, felt a small, familiar pang of annoyance. He had no respect for the instrument, seeing it only as a vehicle for his own genius. He didn't understand that the old Steinway had its own soul, its own moods, and that a true partnership required listening, not just commanding. Finally, the house lights dimmed. A hush fell over the crowd, and a single, bright spotlight found its way to the center of the stage, illuminating the gleaming black piano. The audience erupted in applause as Julian made his grand entrance, his tailcoat flowing behind him. He bowed deeply, a little too deeply, and took his seat at the bench. He adjusted the microphone, gave a final confident nod to the conductor, and placed his long, elegant fingers on the keys. The first few notes were perfect, crisp, clear, and full of the technical brilliance everyone had come to expect. The complex melody began to unfold, a torrent of sound that was both dazzling and intimidating. Clara watched from the wings, her arms crossed over her chest. She had to admit it was impressive. The speed, the precision, it was almost superhuman. But still, it felt cold. It was a beautiful ice sculpture, intricate and perfect, but with no warmth, no life. The music built towards a powerful crescendo. The entire orchestra swelled with him, driving towards a climactic, thunderous chord that was designed to bring the audience to the edge of their seats. Julian's body tensed, his fingers flying, and then he brought them down with all his force. And in that moment, it happened. A sound that no one was expecting. A sickening, metallic twang that cut through the symphony like a knife. It was a sound of something breaking, something giving way under pressure. The music stopped. Dead. For a moment, there was only a stunned, confused silence. The audience members looked at each other, whispering. On stage, Julian's hands were frozen over the keys, his face a mask of disbelief. He stared at the piano as if it had personally betrayed him. The conductor lowered his baton, his eyes wide with alarm. Mr. Abernathy, who had been watching from the side of the stage, felt his heart drop into his stomach, then all hell broke loose. What was that? Julian hissed, his voice no longer smooth and confident, but sharp and ugly. He slammed his fist down on the keys, producing a discordant crash that made the audience flinch. "This instrument is garbage. It's a museum piece." He shot up from the bench, his face flushed with rage. He turned on Mr. Abernathy, who was already rushing onto the stage. "This is your fault. You maintain these relics? You've ruined my premiere." Mr. Abernathy, sweating profusely, tried to placate him. "Julian, please, let's just figure out what happened." He knelt by the piano, peering inside. His worst fear was confirmed. One of the bass strings, a thick steel cord, had snapped. It was now coiled like a dead snake inside. The belly of the grand. Panic set in. Mr. Abernathy frantically waved for his head technician. "Get the piano tuner on the phone. Now," he barked, his voice cracking. A stagehand scrambled away, already dialing. The whispers in the audience grew louder, turning into a restless murmur. People were shifting in their seats, checking their watches. This was not the polished, perfect evening they had paid for. The technician's call came back with devastating news. The only person in the city with the skill and the specific string for a vintage Steinway of this caliber was stuck. A major accident on the freeway had completely shut down traffic. He was at least an hour and a half away, maybe more. Julian was pacing the stage like a caged animal. An hour and a half? This is a disaster. A complete and utter disaster. He yelled, his voice echoing through the now silent hall. "I will not wait. I refuse. Mr. Abernathy, his face pale, tried to think of an alternative. Okay. Plan B? We'll bring out the other piano. The Yamaha. It's in the back. We can have it on stage in 10 minutes. This suggestion only made Julian more furious. He stopped pacing and stared at Abernathy as if he had just suggested he'd play a toy accordion. The Yamaha. That thing? It's an insult. It has no soul, no depth. I am an artist, not a lounge singer. I will not debase this piece of music by playing it on that. That appliance? The situation was hopeless. The star performer refused to perform. The main instrument was broken. The fixer was stuck on the other side of the city. The audience was getting restless, and the millions of dollars in donations that were supposed to be pledged tonight were slipping away with every passing minute. Mr. Abernathy felt a cold dread wash over him. His career was flashing before his eyes. He looked out at the sea of expectant, then confused, then annoyed faces. He looked at the fuming diva on his stage. He looked at the broken piano, the heart of his beautiful auditorium, now silent and still, and in the shadows, watching it all, stood Clara. She saw the snapped string, heard the panic in Mr. Abernathy's voice, and felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. While everyone else saw a catastrophe, she saw a problem. And she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that it was a problem she could solve. She just had to find the courage to step out of the shadows. The chaos on stage was a living thing, a beast with 1,000 murmuring voices and one very loud, angry roar at its center. Mr. Abernathy felt like a tiny ship caught in a hurricane. His professional life flashing before his eyes with every furious word Julian spat. The audience was no longer just restless. A low, dangerous grumble was starting to roll through the auditorium like distant thunder. People were getting up, moving towards the aisles. The night, which was supposed to be a triumph, was collapsing into a spectacular, very public failure. And in the middle of it all stood the broken piano, a beautiful wounded beast, silent and still. From the deep shadows by the heavy velvet curtains, Clara watched it all unfold. Her heart wasn't pounding with panic like Mr. Abernathy's. Instead, a strange, calm clarity had settled over her. She saw the problem, and she saw the solution. It was as simple as a leaky faucet or a scuff on the floor. It just needed the right person and the right tools. The only problem was, the person who had the tools was her. And the person who needed to use them was terrified. For 30 years, she had made herself small. She had learned to be quiet, to blend in, to be invisible. It was a survival skill. Speaking up, drawing attention to herself, felt like stepping out into a blizzard without a coat. The voices of doubt, old and familiar, began to whisper in her mind. Who do you think you are? They'll laugh at you. You'll lose your job. Just stay quiet. It's not your problem. But then she looked at the piano. She thought of its history, the countless hands that had played it, the music it had made, and she saw Julian pacing and ranting, not with concern for the instrument, but with pure, selfish rage. He didn't love the piano. He only loved what it could do for him. Something inside Clara, a small, quiet spark that she had kept carefully guarded for decades, suddenly flared to life. It wasn't about him or Mr. Abernathy or the restless crowd. It was about the piano. It deserved better, taking a deep breath that felt like swallowing glass. Clara pushed her cleaning cart back into the wings and took a single step forward out of the shadows. It was the hardest step she had ever taken. The dim backstage light caught her gray uniform, and suddenly, all eyes on stage turned towards her. Julian stopped his pacing mid-stride. Mr. Abernathy stared at her as if she'd just materialized from thin air. "Excuse me?" Clara said. Her voice was soft, almost lost in the tense silence, but it was clear. It was the voice she used when speaking to a frightened animal or a crying child, calm, steady, and non-threatening. Mr. Abernathy blinked. "Clara? What is it?" "Now is not the time." Clara ignored him, her eyes fixed on the open belly of the piano. "I heard what happened," she said, a little louder this time. "The G string below middle C, it snapped." Julian let out a short, ugly laugh. Of course it did. This whole place is a relic. He looked Clara up and down, his eyes full of disdain. And what do you know about it? Are you going to clean it until it fixes itself? Clara didn't even look at him. She kept her focus on Mr. Abernathy, who looked like he was about to have a heart attack. I might be able to help, she continued, her voice unwavering. I have a spare string for that model, and the tools to put it on. The statement hung in the air, so absurd that for a moment no one reacted. Julian stared at her, then at Mr. Abernathy, his expression turning from anger to pure, unadulterated mockery. Her? The cleaning lady? Don't be ridiculous, he sneered. She probably thinks a tuning fork is something you eat with. Mr. Abernathy was desperate. He was a man standing on the edge of a cliff, and Clara had just offered him a rope, even if it looked a little frayed. He looked at her face so serious, so command something made him hesitate. He had known Clara for 15 years. She was always quiet, always reliable. She had never once been anything but professional. You have a spare string? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Clara nodded. In my locker? In the basement? It's an old set I've kept. Just in case. In case of what? A sudden piano emergency during your mopping? Julian quipped, earning a few nervous titters from the stagehands. But Mr. Abernathy was tuning him out. He looked out at the audience, at the critics scribbling in their notepads, at the board members looking at their watches. He had no other options. The professional tuner was an hour away. The star performer was refusing to play the backup piano. The night was a disaster. What did he have to lose? Okay, he said, his voice cracking. Okay, Clara, go, get it. Hurry. Letta didn't need to be told twice. She turned and walked away, her steps quick and purposeful. As she disappeared into the darkness of the backstage corridor, Julian threw his hands up in the air. This is insane. I'm putting my career in the hands of a janitor. This is a joke. But Clara was already in the basement, a place that smelled of damp earth and old paint. She went to a small, gray, metal locker that had been hers for as long as she'd worked there. Tucked behind her extra uniform and a worn-out coat was not a toolbox, but a small wooden case, dark with age and polished smooth by decades of use. It had been her father's. Inside, nestled in velvet lining, were not the heavy tools of a custodian, but the precise, delicate instruments of a piano technician. There were tuning hammers of various sizes, a set of mutes, and several small packets of spare strings, each labeled in neat, spidery handwriting. She found the one for the G-string and hurried back upstairs. When she returned, the tension on stage was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. She placed her wooden case on the floor next to the piano and opened it. The soft click of the latches seemed to echo in the silence. Julian watched, his arms crossed, his face a mask of smug disbelief, ready for the show to fail. But Clara didn't even seem to notice him. She was in her own world. She knelt by the piano, her movements efficient and sure. She carefully removed the broken, coiled string, her fingers gentle. Then, with a practiced ease that was mesmerizing to watch, she threaded the new string through the intricate mechanism inside the piano. It was a delicate, fiddly job, but her hands, which just hours ago had been gripping a mop handle, now moved with the grace and precision of a surgeon. She used a small wrench to tighten the pin at the top, then brought out her tuning hammer. She leaned in close, her ear just inches from the strings, and gently struck the key. A dull, flat thud sounded. She turned the pin a tiny fraction of an inch, struck it again. A little higher. Again, higher. She wasn't looking at a device. She was listening. She was tuning by ear, her face a picture of intense concentration. The frantic energy on stage began to change. The stagehands stopped their nervous whispering and started to watch. Fascinated, Mr. Abernathy stood with his mouth slightly agape. Even Julian found himself uncrossing his arms, leaning forward slightly. The woman they had all ignored, the woman they had dismissed, was working on the priceless instrument with a confidence and skill that was undeniable. She wasn't just fixing it. She was communicating with it. Within 15 minutes, it was done. She sat back on her heels and played a simple C major chord. The sound was pure, clear, and perfectly in tune. The new string had blended in seamlessly, as if it had always been there. A wave of relief so powerful it was almost dizzying washed over Mr. Abernathy. He let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Clara. I don't know what to say, he stammered, his eyes wide with gratitude and awe. Thank you. Thank you so much. Clara just nodded, carefully packing her tools back into their wooden case. She was already retreating back into her shell. Her job done, but then a spark of inspiration, or perhaps just a profound sense of wonder, hit Mr. Abernathy. He looked at the now perfect piano, then at the quiet woman who had saved his night. An idea, bold and a little crazy, formed in his mind. As a thank you, he said, his voice gaining strength, why don't you play a few simple scales? Just to warm it up for the maestro. He gestured towards Julian, who was standing very still, his face a canvas of disbelief and something else, something that looked unnervingly like fear. Mr. Abernathy's words hung in the air, fragile and absurd. Why don't you play a few simple scales? Just to warm it up for the maestro, said it with a kind, hopeful smile. A small gesture of gratitude to the woman who had just snatched his career from the jaws of disaster. But to Clara, it sounded like a death sentence. The blood drained from her face, and for a terrifying moment she felt the floor tilt beneath her. Every eye on stage was now fixed on her. The stagehands, the conductor, and most of all, Julian, whose expression had morphed from smug disbelief to outright contempt. A wave of panic, cold and sharp, washed over her. Play here. Now, in front of him. The voices in her head, the ones she had successfully silenced for 30 years, came screaming back. You can't. You're a fraud. You're just a cleaner. They'll laugh. You'll make a fool of yourself and lose everything. Her hands, which had been so steady and sure just moments ago, began to tremble. She clutched them together. Hiding the tremor in the folds of her gray uniform, she looked at the piano. Her old friend, and it suddenly seemed like a stranger. A monster with 88 teeth, waiting to bite. She remembered the last time she had played for an audience. It was in a small, dusty church hall a lifetime ago. She was young, filled with a nervous, fragile hope. She had played well, but not perfectly. And a man in the front row, a local music teacher known for his harsh reviews, had sighed loudly and whispered to his neighbor, technically adequate, but no soul, no fire. Those words had shattered her. They had become the truth she lived by. The reason she put her dream away in a box and never looked at it again. Now, standing in the glare of the stage lights, she felt that same crushing weight of inadequacy. Julian finally broke the silence with a short, sharp laugh that was like glass breaking. Scales. This is priceless, he said, turning to the conductor with a look of pure amusement. By all means, let's have the cleaning lady play us a tune. It will be a charming little interlude before the real music begins. He said the word real with a venomous bite, making it clear exactly where he placed Clara in the grand scheme of things. Something inside Clara shifted at that moment. It wasn't a sudden burst of courage or a fiery anger. It was quieter than that. It was a deep, weary resignation. She looked at Julian's sneering face, at his perfect posture and his expensive tailcoat. She saw the arrogance, the entitlement, the complete lack of respect for anything or anyone he deemed beneath him. And she realized, with a startling clarity, that she no longer cared what he thought. His opinion, the opinion of that man in the church hall all those years ago, none of it mattered. The only thing that mattered was the quiet, a broken promise she had made to herself a long time ago, and the silent, patient piano waiting in front of her. She didn't look at Mr. Abernathy or Julian. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod and walked slowly towards the bench. Each step felt heavy, as if she were walking through water. The whispers of the stagehands died down as she passed. The world seemed to narrow. The blinding stage lights, the expectant faces, the hum of the restless audience, it all faded into a dull roar. Leaving only the polished black wood of the piano and the promise of the ivory keys, she sat down. The bench was cold and hard. She smoothed her uniform over her lap, a nervous, habitual gesture. For a long moment, she just sat there, her hands resting in her lap. She wasn't thinking about the audience or the critics or the furious pianist watching her every move. She was thinking about her father and how he used to sit her on his knee when she was a little girl, his large, calloused hand guiding hers over the keys. "Music isn't about hitting the right notes, Clarabug," he used to say, his voice a low rumble. "It's about the space between the notes. It's about telling a story without using any words." Slowly, she lifted her hands and placed them on the keys. They felt familiar and foreign at the same time. She took a deep breath, the air thick with the smell of dust and old velvet. And then she began to play. She started with a simple C major scale, just as Mr. Abernathy had suggested. But it wasn't the robotic exercise-like scale a student would play. She played it slowly, each note ringing out with a clear, singing tone. It was less of a scale and more of a question, a gentle greeting to the instrument and the silent hall. The sound was pure and clean, and it seemed to absorb all the tension in the air, leaving a strange, expectant peace in its wake. The stagehands, who had been poised for a cringeworthy disaster, found themselves leaning in, their work forgotten. The conductor lowered his baton, his eyes fixed on the quiet woman at the piano. Julian's smirk faltered. This was not what he had expected. There was a control, a touch, a quality to the sound that was immediately undeniably professional. And then Clara did something no one expected. Instead of another scale, she flowed seamlessly from the last note of the scale into the first haunting melody of the very piece. Julian was supposed to premiere. It was the same complex modern composition, but it was transformed. Where Julian's version was a sprint, a frantic display of speed and power, hers was a journey. She didn't attack the notes. She coaxed them out. She lingered on certain phrases, letting the emotion bloom in the silence between the notes. Just as her father had taught her, the music began to tell a story. It was no longer just a collection of difficult passages designed to impress. It was a story of longing, of a quiet struggle, of a love that was lost but never forgotten. Her fingers, which had seemed so stiff and hesitant at first, now moved with a fluid grace that was breathtaking to watch. They danced across the keys, not with the cold precision of a machine, but with the warm, intimate touch of a lover. She played with a depth of feeling that seemed to come from the very marrow of her bones. It was the sound of a life lived with all its heartbreaks and its small, hard-won joys. Backstage, the world had stopped. The conductor had a look of profound wonder on his face, as if he were hearing the piece for the first time and realizing what it was truly meant to be. The stagehands stood motionless, their mouths slightly agape, but the most dramatic transformation was happening to Julian. He stood frozen, his arms hanging limply at his sides. The arrogant smirk had long since vanished, replaced by a look of utter disbelief. As Clara's music swelled, filling every corner of the vast auditorium, he seemed to shrink. His entire career, his entire identity, was built on the foundation that he was the best, that he had a unique and unparalleled connection to the music. But in that moment, he was hearing a connection so deep, so authentic, that it made his own playing sound like a child's fumbling attempt. He was witnessing true artistry, and it was coming from the one person he had deemed worthless. The realization was not just humbling, it was devastating. Clara played on, lost in the music. She was no longer on a stage in front of people. She was back in her father's workshop. She was walking alone on a windswept beach. She was crying in a small, empty room. The music poured out of her, a river of sound that washed away 30 years of silence and regret. She reached the thunderous climax, the same chord that had broken the piano before. But this time, when her fingers came down, the sound that erupted was not of breaking, but of pure, unadulterated power. It was a roar of triumph, a declaration of survival. And then, as the final notes faded away, she brought her hands to rest on the keys. And the hall was plunged into a silence so complete, so profound, it was louder than any applause. The final thunderous chord Clara played seemed to hang in the air, a shimmering, vibrant entity that refused to die. It echoed off the high ceilings and the ornate, gilded walls, a sound so full of power and pain and beauty that it felt alive. And then, as the last vibration faded into nothingness, a silence fell over the Royal Crest Auditorium. It was not the ordinary silence of an empty room, nor the expectant hush before a performance begins. It was a silence so complete, so profound, that it was louder than any applause. It was the sound of 1,000 people, both on stage and off, collectively holding their breath, their minds struggling to process what they had just heard. On stage, time seemed to have stopped. The conductor stood frozen, his baton still lowered, his eyes wide with a kind of holy reverence. The stagehands, who had seen countless rehearsals and performances, were statues, their faces turned towards the plain woman in the gray uniform. They were no longer seeing a custodian. They were seeing the source of the magic that had just filled the room. The most dramatic change, however, was in Julian. He stood just to the side of the piano, his perfect posture now slumped, his arms hanging limply at his sides. The arrogant, smug mask he always wore had been completely shattered, leaving behind a raw, exposed face filled with a mixture of awe, confusion, and deep, gut-wrenching humiliation. He had built his entire life on the belief that he was special, that his talent was a rare and precious gift that set him above everyone else. In the span of 5 minutes, Clara had not just played his music better than he could. She had shown him that his talent was a shallow, technical trick compared to the deep, soulful wellspring she had drawn from. He was a man who had just discovered that the world was not flat, and he was staring into the vast, terrifying, beautiful unknown. The silence was finally broken by a sound from the wings. It wasn't a loud clap or a shout. It was a single, soft clap from a young stagehand, a kid who usually moved scenery and dreamed of being a musician himself. His hands came together once, then again a little louder this time. It was an involuntary gesture, a pure, unthinking response to the beauty he had just witnessed. Another stagehand joined in. Then the conductor began to clap, slowly at first, then with more conviction. It was like the first few drops of a rainstorm, quickly growing into a downpour. Within seconds, the entire crew backstage was erupting in a deafening, heartfelt ovation. It wasn't the polite, obligatory applause of a well-behaved audience. It was a roar of pure, unadulterated emotion. It was an apology. It was a tribute. It was the sound of people who had witnessed something truly extraordinary and felt honored to have been there for it. The sound washed over the stage, a wave of validation and respect that was 30 years in the making. Clara, however, did not see it as a tribute. To her, it was a terrifying wave of noise and attention. As the first clap sounded, she flinched as if she'd been struck. Her hands flew from the keys and retreated into her lap. Her head was bowed, her shoulders hunched, every muscle in her body screaming at her to run, to hide, to become invisible again. This was her worst nightmare come true. All eyes on her, a spotlight she had never asked for. She felt exposed, vulnerable, and deeply, deeply uncomfortable. Mr. Abernathy was the first to move. He walked onto the stage, his face a picture of awe and profound guilt. He ignored the clapping crew and walked directly to Clara. He didn't say anything at first, just stood beside her for a moment, letting the sound of the applause wash over them both. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "Clara," he said softly. "Clara, look at me." Slowly, hesitantly, she lifted her head. Her eyes were wide and filled with a fear he had never seen before. "I have to go," she whispered, starting to get up. "Double quotes, no, please," he said, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "Don't go. Just stay there for a moment." He turned to the audience, a sea of confused faces. They had heard the music, but they didn't know who had played it. He took the microphone from its stand. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice shaking slightly, "we have had a technical difficulty, but we have also been witness to a miracle. The music you just heard was not from our scheduled performer. It was from one of our own. From the heart and soul of this very hall." He gestured towards Clara, who looked like she wanted the floor to swallow her whole. A new wave of applause. It's time from the audience erupted. It was more confused, but just as enthusiastic. In the front row, the stern-faced music critic from the city's major newspaper slowly lowered his pen. He had been ready to write a scathing review about a spoiled prodigy and a poorly managed event. Now, he simply stared at the stage, a look of profound reverence on his face. He knew he had just heard something that would never be forgotten. After the performance, as the crew began to pack up and the buzz of excitement filled the air, Mr. Abernathy found Clara in the hallway, trying to slip away unnoticed. "Clara, wait," he called out. She stopped, her back to him, her shoulders tense. "Mr. Abernathy, I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have done that. It won't happen again. I'll understand if you need to let me go." Her voice was small, defeated. Convinced she had overstepped and ruined everything, he hurried to her side. And when she turned around, he saw the tears welling in her eyes. "Let you go? Clara, what I saw tonight was the most beautiful thing I have ever seen in this building, and I have been here for 40 years. I am the one who should be sorry. I am sorry I never saw it. I am sorry we all never saw you." He took a deep breath. "I don't want you to go. In fact, I have a proposition for you. We are creating a new position here. A position that is long, long overdue. The official and highly respected piano curator and resident tuner of the Royal Crest Auditorium. It comes with a proper salary, benefits, and your own workshop. And I would be honored if you would agree to give a special performance just once a year. For you, not for them. For you and for the piano." Clara stared at him, her mind struggling to comprehend his words. It was too much. It was everything she had ever wanted and everything she was terrified of all at once. She thought about the dusty closet of a room she lived in, about her aching back and her tired hands. She thought about the joy she felt when the music flowed through her, a feeling she had kept locked away for so long. She looked at Mr. Abernathy's kind, earnest face and saw that he was genuine. A single tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek. She didn't say anything, but she gave a small, slow nod. Her life didn't become a whirlwind of fame and international tours. That wasn't her story. Instead, her life became quiet and full in a way it had never been before. She had a small, sunny room in the basement filled with her tools and sheet music. The young musicians who practiced at the hall no longer ignored her. They sought her out, asking for her advice, not just on tuning, but on the feel of a phrase, the emotion hidden in a score. They called her Maestro Clara, and she would blush and wave them away, but a quiet, genuine smile would always appear on her face. She was no longer invisible. She was Clara, the woman whose hands could coax a story from 88 strings. The quiet guardian of the music and the living, breathing soul of the Royal Crest Auditorium. And once a year, on a quiet night, she would sit at the grand piano and play, her music filling the hall. A testament to the fact that the most profound and breathtaking stories are often hidden in the most unassuming of places, just waiting for the courage to be heard.